In the vast wilderness of Patagonia, where jagged peaks pierce the sky and endless steppes stretch beyond the horizon, 3 experienced hikers stepped into the unknown and vanished completely. For 11 years, their disappearance remained one of the region's most baffling mysteries. Then, a single discovery in a remote shepherd's cabin would turn everything upside down, raising more questions than answers and suggesting that what happened in those windswept mountains might be far darker than anyone imagined. Adrian Miller, Lucas Bachmann, and Helena Weiss were not your typical tourists. These 3 Austrians, all in their early 30s, were seasoned mountaineers who had conquered peaks across Europe and South America. Their friendship had been forged in the mountains of the Austrian Alps 15 years earlier, during a climbing course that had nearly ended in disaster when an unexpected blizzard trapped their group for 3 days in a mountain hut. Adrian, a geologist by profession, had spent years studying remote rock formations across 6 continents. His specialty was volcanic geology, and he had published papers on the unique mineral compositions found in Patagonian granite. Colleagues described him as methodical and cautious, someone who never took unnecessary risks. His apartment in Vienna was filled with rock samples from around the world, each carefully labeled and catalogued. Lucas, a former army ranger with the Austrian Special Forces, possessed survival skills that could keep him alive in the harshest conditions. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan, where he learned to navigate hostile terrain and live off minimal resources. After leaving the military, he worked as a mountain rescue specialist in the Tyrol region, saving dozens of lives over the years. His tactical training and leadership abilities made him the natural leader of any expedition. Helena, a wildlife photographer whose work had appeared in National Geographic and BBC documentaries, had documented expeditions in some of the world's most isolated places. She had spent months alone in Arctic territories photographing polar bears, had tracked snow leopards through the Himalayas, and had captured intimate portraits of Andean condors in their natural habitat. Her Instagram account, followed by over 200,000 nature enthusiasts, showcased her fearless approach to capturing the planet's most elusive wildlife. The 3 had maintained their friendship through annual expeditions, each more ambitious than the last. They had traversed the Greenland ice sheet, climbed unnamed peaks in the Karakoram Range, and explored cave systems in Patagonia's marble caverns. Their shared motto was, "Leave only footprints, take only photographs," a philosophy that had guided them through countless adventures without incident. In March 2012, the trio arrived in El Calafate, Argentina, with ambitious plans to explore the lesser-known regions of southern Patagonia. Unlike the crowded trails of Torres del Paine, they sought the untouched wilderness where few dared to venture, a decision that would prove fateful. They had spent months planning this expedition, studying satellite imagery, consulting with local guides, and preparing for what they called their ultimate Patagonian adventure. Their intended route would take them through the remote Hielo Continental, a massive ice field that forms the backbone of Patagonia. This ambitious plan would cover over 200 kilometers of some of the most challenging terrain on Earth, including glacier crossings, river fords, and ascents through unmapped mountain passes. The expedition was planned to last 18 days, with carefully calculated supply drops and emergency extraction points. Local guides at El Calafate warned them about the unpredictable weather patterns that could change from sunny skies to life-threatening storms within hours. They spoke of the treacherous terrain where hidden crevasses could swallow a person without warning, and the complete absence of cellular coverage that made rescue operations nearly impossible. The nearest hospital was over 400 kilometers away, accessible only by helicopter in good weather conditions. But Adrian, Lucas, and Helena were confident in their abilities. They carried state-of-the-art equipment, GPS devices with backup batteries, 2 satellite phones, emergency beacons, enough supplies for 3 weeks, specialized glacier crossing gear, and most importantly, the trust and experience they had built over 15 years of climbing together. Their combined expertise seemed to cover every possible contingency. The night before their departure, hotel staff later recalled seeing them in the lobby, poring over topographic maps and checking weather forecasts on a laptop computer. Helena was heard joking with the concierge about sending postcards from the end of the world, while Lucas methodically repacked their first aid supplies for the 3rd time. Adrian spent the evening photographing their route plans and equipment lists, a habit from his scientific training that would later help investigators understand their intentions. On March 15th, they checked out of their hotel in El Calafate at 8:30 a.m., loaded their rented Toyota Hilux with gear, and drove toward the mountains. The vehicle was chosen specifically for its reliability and ground clearance, necessary for navigating the rough gravel roads leading to remote trailheads. Security cameras at an YPF gas station captured them filling up at 2:47 p.m., the last confirmed sighting of the 3 friends alive. In that final footage, enhanced later by forensic video analysts, all 3 appeared in good spirits. Helena could be seen laughing at something Lucas said, while Adrian cleaned the windshield. They moved with the easy confidence of experienced adventurers, beginning another chapter in their shared story of exploration. Nothing in their demeanor suggested they sensed any danger ahead. When the trio failed to return by their scheduled date of April 5th, concern immediately escalated to alarm. Helena's sister in Vienna had been expecting daily check-ins via satellite phone, and when 3 consecutive days passed without contact, she contacted the Austrian embassy in Buenos Aires. The embassy, in turn, reached out to Argentine authorities, triggering what would become one of the most extensive search operations in Patagonian history. The initial response was swift and massive. Within 48 hours, helicopters from the Argentine Air Force were sweeping across endless valleys, their rotors echoing off granite walls that had stood silent for millennia. Ground teams on horseback, led by experienced local guides who knew every hidden valley and secret pass, searched ravines and mountain passes that appeared on no tourist maps. The Argentine Gendarmeria deployed their specialized mountain rescue units, elite soldiers trained in high-altitude operations and extreme weather survival. Volunteers poured in from across South America. Local climbing clubs from Buenos Aires, Chilean mountaineers from Santiago, and even a group of experienced trackers from Bolivia joined the effort. The International Mountain Rescue Association sent a technical team from Switzerland, bringing ground-penetrating radar and thermal imaging equipment. Social media campaigns spread the story worldwide, with hashtag #FindTheAustrianHikers trending across multiple platforms. Even the weather seemed to cooperate during those crucial first weeks, providing unusually clear skies for the aerial searches. Pilots flew grid patterns over 5,000 square kilometers of wilderness, photographing every suspicious shadow and unusual formation. Satellite imagery from multiple commercial providers was analyzed by volunteers, creating a crowdsourced search effort that examined every pixel of high-resolution photography. Their abandoned Toyota Hilux was discovered on March 20th, parked precisely where they had planned to begin their trek, at a remote trailhead leading into the Cerro Torre region. The vehicle sat exactly as described in their expedition notes, positioned to allow for easy loading of gear. Inside, investigators found their detailed route plans, written in Adrian's methodical handwriting, extra food supplies carefully organized in waterproof containers, Helena's backup camera equipment, and even a thermos still containing cold coffee. Everything suggested they had begun their hike exactly as planned, following their predetermined route into some of the most spectacular and dangerous terrain on Earth. Their camp registration book, filled out meticulously according to park regulations, indicated they expected to return on April 3rd. The last entry, written in Helena's distinctive cursive, simply read, "Off to see the condors fly. See you on the other side." But beyond that point, despite the most sophisticated search technology available, the trail went completely cold. Search teams found no footprints in the soft mud near stream crossings, no equipment dropped along the trail, no signs of struggle or disturbance. It was as if 3 people had walked into thin air, vanishing as completely as morning mist in the Patagonian sun. Days turned into weeks, each passing day reducing the likelihood of finding survivors. Search teams battled brutal weather conditions as autumn progressed toward winter. Helicopter pilots risked their lives flying in winds that could slam aircraft into mountainsides without warning. Ground teams pushed deeper into unmapped territories, following animal tracks and shepherd paths that might have intersected with the hiker's route. Specialized teams searched potential shelter sites, caves, abandoned gaucho huts, natural windbreaks where experienced mountaineers might seek refuge during storms. They examined every crevasse accessible without technical climbing equipment, lowered cameras into ice caves, and used sonar to scan the depths of glacial lakes where bodies might have sunk. Some theorized they had fallen into hidden crevasses in the ice field, their bodies swallowed by glaciers that might not release them for decades or centuries. Glaciologists explained how climate change was creating new crevasse patterns, making previously safe routes treacherous. Others suggested they might have been caught in an avalanche, one of the many that regularly reshaped the landscape without human witnesses. After 2 months of searching, with winter approaching and conditions becoming increasingly dangerous for rescue personnel, authorities faced an agonizing decision. The search had already cost over $2 million and required resources desperately needed for other emergencies. Weather forecasters predicted the worst winter storms in a decade, conditions that would make continued searching not just futile, but suicidal. On May 15th, exactly 2 months after the hiker's disappearance, authorities officially called off the active search operation. The announcement was made at a somber press conference in El Calafate, attended by embassy officials, search coordinators, and family members who had flown in from Austria. Adrian, Lucas, and Helena were officially presumed dead, victims of Patagonia's unforgiving wilderness that had claimed so many others before them. Life moved on, as it always does after tragedy strikes. The families held memorial services in Vienna, attended by hundreds of friends, colleagues, and fellow climbers who had known the trio. Insurance claims were processed after the mandatory waiting period. Adrian's geological research was posthumously published by his university colleagues, with proceeds donated to mountain rescue organizations. Helena's final photographs, retrieved from her backup equipment, were displayed in a traveling exhibition that raised awareness about conservation in Patagonia. The Austrian hiking community mourned 3 of their own, but gradually, as new tragedies occurred and new expeditions were planned, the story began to fade from headlines and collective memory. Support groups for families of missing persons helped the relatives cope with the unique agony of not knowing, of having no bodies to bury, no final moment to process. Yet in the remote corners of Patagonia, among the gauchos and shepherds who knew every stone and stream, who had lived their entire lives reading the subtle signs of weather and wildlife, whispers persisted. Some spoke of strange sounds heard on moonless nights, voices calling in a foreign language across valleys where no humans should be. Others mentioned livestock found dead in unusual circumstances, arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate rather than the result of predation or disease. A gaucho named Esteban Morales claimed to have found equipment that didn't belong to any local. A high-tech hiking boot wedged in rocks near a stream, too small for any man in the region and too expensive for any shepherd to afford. But when investigators arrived to examine his find, Esteban had somehow lost track of where he'd seen it, and searchers found nothing. These were rural legends, the kind of stories that flourish in isolated places where wind and solitude can play tricks on the mind, where the boundary between reality and imagination becomes as fluid as the morning mist. Rational people dismissed them as the natural human tendency to create patterns and meaning from random events, to populate empty landscapes with mystery when the truth was simply that 3 people had died in an accident and been claimed by the wilderness. But still, the stories persisted, passed along in late-night conversations around estancia fires, shared between truck drivers on long, lonely roads, whispered among the few tourists who ventured into the deep backcountry. Patagonia had always been a land of legends, of giant ground sloths, of Welsh settlers who vanished into thin air, of pilots who claimed to see cities that couldn't exist. The tale of the 3 Austrian hikers simply became another chapter in a landscape that seemed to collect mysteries the way it collected bones and forgotten dreams. Local police occasionally received reports from travelers who claimed to have seen foreign hikers in remote areas, but these sightings were invariably explained by the presence of other tourists or by tricks of light and distance that made familiar figures appear strange. The human mind, especially in vast, empty landscapes, has a tendency to create what it expects to see. As years passed, the case file grew thicker with false leads and dead ends. A backpack found in Chile turned out to belong to a German tourist who had lost it years earlier. Human remains discovered by a rancher were identified as those of a gaucho who had died in the 1970s. Each potential breakthrough raised hopes that were inevitably dashed by DNA analysis or other forensic evidence. The anniversary of their disappearance became an annual reminder in Austrian mountaineering circles, a cautionary tale told to new climbers about the importance of safety protocols and the unforgiving nature of remote wilderness areas. Their story was featured in documentary films about missing persons, in books about unsolved mysteries, and in online forums where amateur detectives debated theories and analyzed evidence. But as the years accumulated, 5, then 7, then 10, even the most dedicated investigators began to accept that some questions might never be answered. The case files moved from active to cold, joining thousands of others in storage facilities where the dreams and nightmares of families gathered dust while bureaucrats shuffle papers and reassign personnel to more pressing matters. Santiago Vargas had been a shepherd for 47 years, following the same ancient routes his father and grandfather had used before him. His stone cabin, built into a hillside 600 kilometers from where the hikers had vanished, served as shelter during the worst storms. It was a simple structure, 4 walls, a tin roof, and barely enough space for a man and his dogs. In November 2023, while cleaning out the cabin for winter, Santiago made a discovery that would reignite one of Patagonia's greatest mysteries. Wedged behind a loose stone in the wall, he found an Austrian passport. The document belonged to Lucas Bachmann, one of the missing hikers. But this wasn't just any passport. Dark stains covered several pages, stains that preliminary tests suggested were human blood. Santiago immediately contacted the local police, insisting he had never seen the document before. He claimed he rarely used the cabin and couldn't explain how the passport had gotten there. His weathered hands shook as he spoke to investigators, whether from fear or the cold mountain air. No one could say. The discovery sent shockwaves through both Austrian and Argentine authorities, reaching the highest levels of both governments. The Austrian embassy immediately dispatched their senior consular affairs officer, while Argentine federal police opened a criminal investigation that would eventually involve over 50 investigators, forensic specialists, and international experts in missing persons cases. How had Lucas's passport traveled 600 kilometers from the original search area? The distance was staggering when considered in the context of Patagonian geography. 600 kilometers across some of the most difficult terrain on Earth, through roadless wilderness, across rivers that could only be forded at certain times of year, over mountain passes that challenged even experienced guides. Why was it hidden in a shepherd's cabin that appeared to have no connection to the original disappearance? And most disturbing of all, whose blood stained its pages, and how had it gotten there? The initial forensic analysis was conducted at the Federal Crime Laboratory in Buenos Aires, using equipment that hadn't been available during the original investigation in 2012. DNA analysis confirmed the blood was human, but 11 years of exposure to humidity, temperature fluctuations, and other environmental factors had degraded the genetic material beyond the point where individual identification was possible. The blood type, however, matched Lucas Bachmann's medical records. The passport itself was subjected to every forensic technique available to modern investigators. Fingerprint analysis revealed only Santiago's prints on the exterior, but the interior pages had been too damaged by moisture and time to yield useful results. Chemical analysis of the paper confirmed it was consistent with Austrian passport materials from the early 2000s, and the serial number matched records of the document issued to Lucas in 2009. Forensic experts noted that the blood appeared to have been fresh when it first contacted the document. There were patterns consistent with active bleeding rather than transfer from dried blood. Some pages were stuck together in ways that suggested the passport had been saturated with blood while it was closed, then allowed to dry in that position. The implications were chilling. Investigators thoroughly searched Santiago's cabin and the surrounding area using technology that represented the cutting edge of forensic archaeology. They brought in ground-penetrating radar capable of detecting burial sites up to 15 feet deep, cadaver dogs trained to locate human remains decades old, and forensic archaeologists who had worked on war crimes investigations in Bosnia and Rwanda. Teams searched every square meter within a 5-kilometer radius of the cabin. They excavated suspicious soil disturbances, tested water sources for traces of human DNA, and used metal detectors to search for hidden evidence. They examined every stone wall, every foundation, every animal burrow that might have been disturbed or modified. They found nothing, no bones, no additional evidence, no signs that anyone had been buried or hidden in the vicinity. The investigation expanded to include a complete background check on Santiago Vargas that went back 3 generations. Investigators examined bank records, interviewed dozens of neighbors and business associates, and constructed a timeline of his movements that covered the last 30 years. They found a man whose life had been remarkably consistent and unremarkable, a solitary shepherd who had never been arrested, who paid his taxes, who was known for his reliability and honesty. Santiago submitted to multiple interrogations, some lasting over 8 hours. He was questioned by experts in criminal psychology, specialists in detecting deception, and investigators experienced in extracting confessions from hardened criminals. He passed polygraph tests administered by 3 different operators using different techniques. His story never changed, never wavered, never included the kind of small inconsistencies that typically reveal deception. His alibi for March 2012 was not just solid, it was ironclad. He had been in Buenos Aires caring for his dying mother, who had been hospitalized with cancer. Hospital records confirmed his presence, security cameras showed him visiting daily, and dozens of witnesses, nurses, doctors, other patients' families, remembered the quiet shepherd who had maintained a bedside vigil for 6 weeks. His mother had died on April 2, 2012, and Santiago had remained in the city for another week to handle funeral arrangements and settle her affairs. Other shepherds in the remote region vouched for his character with an unanimity that surprised even experienced investigators. In a community where gossip travels faster than news and where everyone knows everyone else's business, not a single person had ever heard Santiago speak ill of tourists, express xenophobic sentiments, or show any signs of the psychological instability that might lead to violence. The blood-stained passport raised disturbing possibilities that investigators could no longer ignore, transforming what had been assumed to be a tragic accident into a potential criminal case that challenged every assumption about what had happened to the 3 Austrian hikers. Had they encountered foul play in the wilderness they had come to explore? Were they victims of robbery gone wrong, or something far more sinister? The first theory that emerged focused on the possibility that the hikers had stumbled upon illegal activities in the remote regions they were exploring. Patagonia, despite its reputation as pristine wilderness, had long been a corridor for drug trafficking operations moving cocaine from Bolivia and Peru toward shipping ports in Argentina and Chile. The vast, unmonitored spaces provided perfect cover for landing strips, storage facilities, and transportation routes that operated completely outside government oversight. Perhaps the 3 Austrians, with their high-end equipment and obvious wealth, had inadvertently photographed or witnessed something they weren't supposed to see. Drug trafficking organizations, investigators knew, had a history of extreme violence when protecting their operations. The passport might have been kept as a trophy or insurance policy, later hidden when the initial investigation grew too intense. This theory gained credibility when investigators discovered that several drug interdiction operations had occurred in southern Patagonia during 2012, including the seizure of a cocaine processing facility only 150 kilometers from where the hikers had begun their expedition. Federal narcotics agents confirmed that trafficking organizations had become increasingly aggressive toward civilian witnesses during that period, following a government crackdown that had made their operations more vulnerable to exposure. Other investigators proposed a more complex scenario. What if one of the hikers had initially survived whatever incident had befallen the group, only to encounter violence later? Lucas, with his military training and survival skills, would have been the most likely to survive an accident that killed his companions. The blood on the passport might belong to Lucas himself, wounded but alive, desperately trying to signal for help or hide evidence before meeting his final fate. This theory was supported by the way the blood had soaked into specific pages of the passport. Forensic analysis suggested that the document had been handled by someone who was actively bleeding, possibly from wounds to their hands or fingers. The pattern was consistent with someone trying to use the passport as identification while injured, perhaps attempting to communicate their identity to potential rescuers or captors. A darker theory emerged from criminal psychologists who had studied serial killers operating in remote areas. They suggested that the passport might have been planted years later by someone connected to the disappearance, either to mislead investigators or to satisfy some psychological need to revisit the crime. This behavior pattern, known as trophy revisitation, had been documented in cases where killers returned to crime scenes or maintained collections of victim belongings for psychological gratification. The geographic distance between the original search area and the cabin where the passport was found supported this theory. If the hikers had died in an accident, their belongings should have been found in the same general area. The fact that one specific item had traveled 600 kilometers suggested deliberate human action rather than natural processes like flooding or animal scavenging. Some investigators proposed that the entire disappearance might have been orchestrated by someone familiar with the region, someone who knew the search patterns and capabilities of rescue teams. This person might have taken the hikers' equipment to create the illusion of an accident while concealing evidence of their actual fate. The passport, hidden for over a decade, might represent insurance against discovery or a twisted memento of a perfect crime. Local law enforcement explored the possibility of territorial disputes involving land rights, mining claims, or illegal settlement of government property. The remote regions of Patagonia had long been subject to conflicting claims between government entities, indigenous groups, and private interests. Violence had occasionally erupted when these conflicts intersected with outside observers who might document illegal activities or boundary violations. International experts brought in to analyze the case suggested examining connections to other unsolved disappearances in the region. Database searches revealed that 17 people had vanished in southern Patagonia over the previous 20 years, including solo hikers, couples, and even a family of 4 from Germany. While most of these cases could be explained by accidents, suicide, or people choosing to disappear, the statistical clustering raised questions about whether a predator might be operating in the region. The possibility of human trafficking, while remote, couldn't be entirely dismissed. Criminal organizations had been known to target foreigners with valuable equipment or cash, forcing them to withdraw maximum amounts from ATM machines before disposing of them. However, none of the hikers' bank accounts had shown unusual activity after their disappearance, and their credit cards had never been used. Religious or cult-related violence represented another theoretical possibility. Several extremist groups had established compounds in remote areas of Patagonia, attracted by the isolation and lack of government oversight. These groups had occasionally been linked to violence against outsiders who stumbled upon their activities, though most incidents involved property destruction rather than murder. Despite his apparent innocence, Santiago Vargas became the focus of intense scrutiny. Neighbors noticed he had become increasingly withdrawn since the discovery. He sold most of his sheep and spoke of leaving Patagonia for good. In private conversations, some locals whispered about changes they had observed in Santiago over the years. How he had stopped attending church after 2012. How he sometimes talked to himself while tending his flock. How he would disappear for days at a time, claiming to search for lost animals that were never found. But whispers are not evidence, and suspicion is not proof. Without concrete evidence linking Santiago to the hiker's disappearance, investigators could only watch and wait. For the families of Adrian, Lucas, and Helena, the passport discovery was both a blessing and a curse. After 11 years of uncertainty, they finally had confirmation that something terrible had happened to their loved ones. But instead of providing closure, it opened new wounds and raised new fears. Lucas's sister, Maria Bachmann, flew to Argentina to meet with investigators. She studied crime scene photos of the blood-stained passport, searching for any detail that might provide answers. The document looked so ordinary. The same headshot of her brother she remembered from family trips, now marked by violence and mystery. "It's worse than not knowing," she told reporters. "Before, we could hope they died peacefully in the mountains they loved. Now we know someone hurt them, and we may never know who or why." Today, the case remains officially open but effectively stalled. Argentine authorities continue to investigate, but leads have dried up. Santiago Vargas has moved away from the area, his whereabouts unknown. The cabin where the passport was found sits empty, gradually surrendering to the Patagonian winds. Advanced forensic techniques continue to evolve, offering hope that future analysis might reveal additional clues. DNA technology that didn't exist in 2012 might someday identify the source of the blood or reveal other genetic evidence from the passport. But for now, the fate of Adrian Muller, Lucas Bachmann, and Helena Weiss remains one of Patagonia's most haunting mysteries. Their story serves as a chilling reminder that even in our modern world, people can simply vanish without a trace, and that sometimes the discoveries that follow are more terrifying than the original disappearance. In the vast wilderness of Patagonia, where the wind never stops and the mountains keep their secrets, three friends walk on in memory, their final story still waiting to be told. The search for answers continues, but in a land where condors soar over endless emptiness and the past lies buried beneath centuries of ice and stone, some mysteries may never be solved.